To this session on Confessions of a CISO, what we wish lawyers knew. Welcome to everyone that's joined us so far and to our esteemed panelists who we'll get to in a bit. But for now, I'd just like to start off by, let me actually share my screen, which should pop up now. So why we're here today is really that law and cybersecurity are increasingly inseparable. They are becoming increasingly inseparable. And this is due to data protection and privacy laws, laws that deal with electronic communications. And so there's this role overlap where cybersecurity professionals have to dabble in the legal areas sometimes, and lawyers have to dabble in areas of cybersecurity. Our goal here as ITLawCo is to build a shared language of trust and of collaboration. And it's in that spirit that we're having this session. But before we begin, I'd just like to say, if you do have any questions, we welcome them as you come along. Pop them in the Q&A session or in the comment section in the chat if you feel comfortable. If you also feel comfortable, feel free to introduce yourself at any point. Then I'd like to clarify that while the speakers, a bit of the legal side of things, but the speakers will be sharing their personal views, and so they're not the views of their organizations. And the information that they'll be sharing is for training and education purposes. In other words, this is a learning experience, a conversation that we're having. So it won't be any technical or legal advice that we'll be sharing with you. And please note, as per the privacy notice, that the session is being recorded. Without further ado, it's time for our meet and greet. I am Nathan Ross Adams, the founder and MD of ITLawCo. I've been working in the IT, legal, and AI space for about 13 years now, looking at this space where ICT, information communications, and technology intersect with the law. And my study background is really in law and data science. Beyond me, I'm joined by four amazing panelists who would like to each introduce themselves and just tell you a little bit about what their week looks like. They are each cybersecurity professionals, and so we'll start off with Grant Hughes.
Hi, good evening all. Thank you, Nathan, for having me. I'm Grant Hughes. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for GVW Group, which is effectively an automotive company. Before that, I spent some time at Ensign in the petroleum sector and also in retail at TFG, spent about 10 years there. So I've had my fair share of interactions with legal counsel attorneys, and I'm happy to share some insights with everyone. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Grant. And I hope some of those interactions with legal teams didn't leave you with very high therapy bills. But let's go over to Duncan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Duncan. I am currently the CISO for Pepcore. Pepcore is a holding company which has about 20 different brands in it, including Pep and Ackermans and Incredible Connection and Code and Refinery and SPCC and Flash. And there's a whole lot of companies in the group. So it's a very exciting role with a lot of different moving parts and different types of businesses that we've got to kind of manage. I'm, as a CISO for the group, the security strategy and governance and everything for the entire group sits with me. So yeah, that's my role. I've been at Pepcore for a bit over a year now. I was at Pick n Pay before that for quite a few years, working in various different roles, but certainly in the security space for about the last 6 or 7 at Pick n Pay as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Duncan. And Duncan has failed to mention one of his hidden talents, which you can see on the screen behind him, and that isn't an artificial background like the rest of us. So don't be surprised if he starts playing fast. And then we have Fundiswa. Would you please introduce yourself?
And Nathan, Fundi just mentioned that she needs to restart her computer quickly. So can we perhaps come back to her at a later stage quickly?
Definitely. Thanks, Jessica. how ironic is it that we're having a session with some of the leading cybersecurity professionals and we're having an IT issue, right? But let's go over to Gerald.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gerald Hector. I'm currently at Momentum Health as the cybersecurity operations manager. So I have over 20 years experience within the IT industry all over the show, at RCS for a couple of years, at IBM for 8 years, at Pick and Pay for 8 years. So I've been around the block. I am not a CISO like Grant and Duncan. I am what they call an armchair CISO. So that's like all of you guys are armchair Springbok rugby coaches and things like that. You can shout from beyond. That's me. I'm advising from beyond the technical side of things. Thanks.
So what Gerald is actually saying that he cracks the whip on the CISO so that they get things done. Fundi will be joining us shortly, but just as a brief intro, she's the VP for cybersecurity at ABSA, and she'll be telling you a bit more about that later on. But for now, I'd like to thank everyone for joining and just open up with a few questions. What do you think what is the biggest misconception you think lawyers have about you? Let's maybe start off with Gerald because he finished.
Of myself or of the organization or of my role? Just can we just clarify that?
Yes, of the cybersecurity role. Is there perhaps any assumptions that lawyers have about cybersecurity professionals or IT professionals in general that you've come across?
Yes, so they think we are all boring and stuck in a dungeon the entire day, which we are not. We are not boring, but we are stuck in the dungeon the entire day. So there's a bit of a disclaimer there. But also is that we know everything. And I mean, technology is so vast that we cannot seem to know everything. From a technical perspective, we learn as we go, but our environment, we know everything about our environment.
No, which is a really excellent point, and maybe Duncan, if you can add to that, are you just grouped in with IT and seen as, oh, he's the IT guy, so maybe he could just restart my password as well, you know? Is that the perspective that's out there?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, security and IT are very closely related. So I think most security people have come through IT. There are some that have come through audit and other sort of paths, but I think for the most part we are mostly an IT bunch. So also one of the things I think is that I think maybe lawyers do have a slight misconception of security teams and security people in organizations, is that unlike the law, which should be quite black and white, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm assuming, I mean, obviously there's loopholes and all kinds of things that you guys work through all the time. But generally speaking, it's fairly black and white, where cybersecurity is not. Cybersecurity is all in the gray. Everything happens in the gray. It's not black and white at all. Our role is to manage risk, not eliminate it. So we have to make sure that we are constantly finding that correct balance between how much security, how many controls, the strictness of things, the rigidity of controls, all that kind of stuff, to balance that obviously with business and what our company is trying to achieve, and the market conditions and the changing threats. It's a constant balancing act. And we definitely don't do anything, don't know everything, and we are figuring most of it out as we go along, because it is just constantly changing. And I think that might be one thing that is slightly different between sort of our roles, that I think often can cause a little bit of tension. I think often the legal stuff is kind of, it's either this or it's that, whereas security is nothing like that. Everything is a compromise. Everything is a balance, trying to find the right sort of level.
I really like what you mentioned over there, because it points out that it's not only maybe a communication challenge between the two different teams, but also an expectation difference. I mean, if the law says, let's say it's a data protection or like the POPIA Act that most people know, or the GDPR says you need to have security measures in place. Written in law, that's pretty simple, but for a CISO and any cybersecurity professional, really, what system? What are you talking about? What does this even apply to? And so which brings me to the question, Grant, for you is there are often these legal requirements, right? But is that at all constrained by budget? Yeah.
Yeah, Nathan, it's actually always constrained by budget, right? So I think maybe just to add to the previous question before I get into this one, something I often come across is, in my experience, is legal people having the view that cyber is purely technical, right? So I think the understanding that cyber is quite broad in terms of policies and process and governance, and even a supporting function for compliance sometimes lack. That's been my encounter. In terms of your question now, yes, definitely. There's always things we need to do, but in the context of the organization, and I'll give you one example. If you look at a DLP, data loss prevention project, right? For a big organization, that could easily stack up to about 10 million rand per annum. Now, if you look at small businesses, there's no way they can afford that, right? Now, if you look at the data protection laws and regulations, it will often say things like you need to employ adequate measures or reasonable measures. And then where things go haywire is the way that is interpreted. So one firm's in-house counsel might think reasonable measures constitute DLP, and another might not. And these things have massive financial implications.
To your point, though, so it really depends on the type of organization as well, the solution that's implemented for them, as well as the budget and risk appetite. I think that's not something that's something that's often overlooked. Sometimes an organization would say at a board level, well, what is the likelihood of this risk materializing, and then make a decision based on that.
Yeah. I think
go, Grant, go.
No, I wanted to say the domain expertise is so important, right? And I think cross domain expertise is very important on both sides. I've been in big organizations where people outside of IT and outside of cyber had concluded that we needed to embark on a technology project to implement A, B, and C to meet a specific regulation, right? And neither of the departments that came to the conclusion actually had the in-depth knowledge to really understand that adequate could have multiple different viable meanings. So I think on that part, there's an opportunity for the legal space to gain a deeper understanding, especially if the specific area of interest is around data protection. And then similarly on the cyber side, I think there's opportunity for cyber professionals to also delve a little bit more into the regulatory side, because whether we like it or not, we support compliance to these regulations. So we might as well skill up in it. Over to you, Duncan.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. I mean, obviously, when budget is always limited, and so what we have to do, and it's not just budgets, money. It's also impact to business, impact to people. We have to make sure we're getting the most bang for buck that we're spending. And spending money on DLP projects, like Rod mentioned, often isn't the best thing to do. There's much better other things that we would rather do. And so I think we as CISOs, our goal is to have a defensible posture, not an impenetrable fortress. Like, we want to make sure that when something does happen, we've taken reasonable steps and we've done what we thought was best with the resources that we had and the time we've had, aligning with our risk appetite, to make sure we put our business in the best sort of possible position. But stuff does happen. It happens all the time. And so how we react to those incidents is as important as what we've done up front.
I mean, you've raised a great point about oops, Paul just popped up on my screen. Let me just move that to the side. The point about this balancing act that needs to take place, and Grant also mentioned that at different stages of or different levels in the organization, the expectations differ, and sometimes you're not included in projects from the beginning when you should be. But at the same time, I think the there's a perspective out there that, well, if we comply with a specific standard, let's say we are ISO 27001 compliant, or we've done SOC 2 implementation, vendors, not vendors, customers typically see that as the sort of gold standard, and there's a checklist of to put it bluntly, that auditors typically have to say that if you have these things in place, you're good as an organization. And so I'm wondering, Gerald, maybe from your perspective, do you think that following a specific standard or following specific technology can fix the entire problem or gap, or is it just a band-aid?
Yeah, so certain technologies, especially certain things that we have to adhere to, like those compliance things, for instance, multi-factor authentication, it might be rolled out, it might be adopted by the organization, but it might not be rolled out everywhere. So, you know, your ISO compliance or your standard that you've got there or certification is a point-in-time certification. Things move at a rapid pace. So if you've got a technology being rolled out, a project can get to 80% before it's signed off, and then the rest is done during business as usual. So that gap will always exist, especially large organizations, and especially organizations that's they call, in inverted commas, agile, which doesn't follow a certain protocol. And you know, but organizations are there to take risks, and that's how they make money. If that answers
the compliance stuff can be a very dangerous thing, Nathan, because often, and I have a very recent example of one of our critical suppliers in our business who very recently, within the last month, got their ISO certificate and got taken out by ransomware shortly after. And I think it is a very, I think if those things are taken too, like, often they can give you a false sense of security, I think, because you haven't often focused on the basics. You've checked all these boxes and you've done kind of what you needed to do to achieve that compliance, but you actually aren't secure. And the message that you can sometimes send up the chain to sort of the senior board level can be wrong because you are chasing the wrong stuff. I kind of see it as sort of compliance is the floor, so it's not the ceiling. We need the compliance is kind of a byproduct of a good security program. It's not the goal of it. If you are having a good security program and you're taking care of the basics, compliance should be relatively easy to achieve. There might be one or two specific little extra things around certain types of data you might need to have some additional controls on. But I think if you haven't got your security program good first before you attack compliance, I think that often is the wrong way around, and it causes a lot more trouble than it's worth, I think.
I'll add something there, Nathan. One of the things with compliance attestations, right? Let's say ISO 27001, it's very specific to scope. So you've got a specific business process, a specific physical location, and even PCI DSS, the payment card one, right? You could have a massive organization, but they will only certify the department and the users that deal with credit card information. Now, you could look at a big company and see that they are PCI DSS certified, but if you really zone in, it's only a very small subset that complies to all the requirements. And it's expensive to comply to external regulations or external standards, right? And that's why it's almost, I want to say, best practice for companies to only scope what they need to get to limit the scope to what is needed, right? So in most cases, you need to look at what exactly is covered in that compliance. We've got a saying in security, compliance doesn't equal security. And one example to think about is, right, in the physical real world, if you think of a window, you've got the fixed part of the window and you've got to open it, right? You only need to have burglar bars on the part that opens to be compliant with your insurance. But the rest of the window still makes you vulnerable.
So it's a really great analogy. I mean, and I think that one of the challenges that this is not understood, because again, moving back to Duncan's point about the black and white, lawyers seeing things in black and white, and I know that's part of the training. I mean, I've read law, I've practiced for several years, and part of the training is look at this law, interpret it, what does it mean, and then check do a gap analysis, check what we have and whether it compares to the law. And practically and operationally, if that were done well, then this wouldn't be a problem because, but I think the standards that have emerged have sort of become shortcuts to actually giving answers to these problems. But moving along to the sort of third-party risk management side of things, one of the comments I typically receive is, why do we need to consult IT or cybersecurity professionals for every customer we bring in or every supplier or vendor we bring on board? It costs money, it costs time, etc. Do you have any insight on a better way to manage that? I see Fundi's hands raised. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Nathan. I'm sorry about that. My computer decided to restart and load patches. So third party is one of my fortes, right? And I've written papers to say that it's a team sport. And I'll give you examples. Sometimes you find a cybersecurity team is trying to risk assess doing business with a company that's, for example, in the US. And all they're thinking about is technical controls to make sure that data is encrypted at rest, it's encrypted in transit. But I always bring lawyers into those conversations because lawyers are first going to check the client's data that we are moving. Is it do we have consent? Do we need to have consent from our South African clients that we are moving their data to the US? That's number one. Lawyers will start thinking about you've got a relationship with a company that's in the US. It doesn't benefit our BE scores. So what are we going to do? And a lot of, especially the big companies, they're not willing to dilute their partnership because they want to score BE points. Lawyers will think about that, or maybe someone from vendor management. Then also lawyers will also think that what if we run into trouble from a relationship basis? So what are we going to do? Are we going to resolve our issues in the US or in South Africa? And then we've got POPIA that we need to comply to. So it's very dangerous for just a cybersecurity team to go into these conversations alone, while you also as lawyers, you need us in those conversations, because apart from trying to comply from a legal standpoint, we need to put controls, cybersecurity controls, to make sure that we finish the entire value chain. Thanks.
Gerald, did you want to add to that?
No. I'm good. I'm actually quite chuffed with the Fundi's reply there.
I can add to it, Nathan. So the everything that Fundi said, absolutely 100%. But I do think that we need to look beyond the whole confidentiality side of it, because often we think we're giving this data to these people, we need to make sure they're protected, and that's absolutely 100% correct. But what I found in our organization is that availability is just as important. If you're signing up for a critical business service with somebody and they go down, like we just had in our example that I just mentioned, and Blue Yonder last year and various others, when they do not keep their security stuff going right and they get taken out by ransomware and they can no longer fulfill the role that they are supposed to do for your business, you stop. You cannot sell stuff, you cannot replenish, you cannot do whatever you need to do. And what I found, that is a much more effective way to get buy-in from our senior executives, is to kind of have that availability discussion. Because if we can get involved early on, and we've got a very simple third-party risk management framework that we use, we've got 6 questions. And if any of the answers to the first 3 are yes, you're a tier 1 vendor, and we have a whole lot of controls that we have to have auditable proof that they comply with. If any of the second set are yes, you're a tier 2 vendor, and if they all know, you're a tier 3 vendor. And that's how we kind of do it. And it is focused on availability and on the confidentiality side of it. But I find from an executive perspective, that's a much easier conversation to have. And it's one that they can understand, because they know exactly how much they sell in a store on a busy Saturday morning. And so if the network is down, for an example, or some other, your ERP system's down, or the third party who was supposed to do something couldn't do it, they can tell you exactly how much that costs. And so it's very easy to have a conversation in rands and cents with them. And so from a third party perspective, I think that's a very, very important thing that we take very, very seriously, because availability is a very important part of our job, not just the confidentiality stuff.
Duncan, I've got a question for you. Do you ever find when you actually identify that risk from a third party that there would be an executive that would override you and say, we will definitely do business and we need to do this?
Yeah, no, 100%. And so we focus very much on educated risk acceptance rather than ignorant risk acceptance. So we make sure that they understand that we work with them, that they understand that this is the real risk. These guys they don't have this, they don't have this. We'd really like them because of the criticality of the system to our business. We would really want them to have this, but maybe there's some reason the next supplier is too expensive, or they're out of the country, or there's some other reason that we can't use them. But the risk sits with business. So they sign it off. We have the risk acceptance process. We never say no. We will say, that's fine. We think that you should make these improvements, but if you can't, the risk sits with you, and that's it.
I see Fundi has a hand raised. Before she goes ahead, I just wanted to say, and it impacts not only, well, from an availability perspective, it wouldn't only impact the purely security side of things, but it would impact the service level agreement between yourself and the vendor as well. And it could extend to quantifying damage. So what it would mean if the payment, let's say it's the speed points which are down for an hour, maybe, what the impact on business would be. But over to you, Fundi.
I don't want to overkill it, but I liked the question that Gerald just asked now. I've had an example where we wanted to do a KYC project. So I come from a very, I'm sorry, I missed the introduction part. So I've been doing risk management for financial institutions, highly regulated environment. So in this case, we had a know your client project, KYC project, and the company that could do this at the cheapest price had no security controls whatsoever. And business said, we are not willing to pay 500 rands per record, while these people were charging something like, I think, 50 rands per record, and they're very good at it, you know. So I actually brought my my cybersecurity team and said, guys, can we find a way that as they update these records, this data is pushed through into our environment so that it spends as little time as possible in that environment, and we make sure that the channel through which it travels, it's secured and it's encrypted. So you'll always get areas where businesses, we definitely want to make this work. So my approach is always let's find mitigating controls. Let's find a safer way of doing it. And like Duncan says, follow that risk acceptance process. And on the risk acceptance process, I make sure that it is the executive, the business executive, that takes accountability, because the systems, the data from a company structure belongs to business, not to IT. So we shouldn't have IT accepting risk on behalf of business, because if anything goes wrong, it is the business that's going to have to go and explain this to the regulator and to the board, not IT people. Thanks.
Yeah. I just want to add to that, Fundi and Duncan, this is a question for you, right? So if we look at our organizations that we work in, it's pretty big, right? And we always like to help the smaller guy. So if the smaller guy or the smaller third party comes to us and they want to provide a certain service to us, do you guys ever cross that line and actually assist them, nudge them along, or hold their hand to cross that bridge with you guys?
Absolutely, we do. It is in our best interest that our vendors are secure. And so where it makes sense, obviously we can't do it for everybody, but where it makes sense and it's a strategic partnership, we absolutely do help them out and offer sort of, go and spend a day with them and just kind of help them out a little bit, for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I was also going to say, yes, we actually did. We once signed a contract with a couple of startups in Silicon Valley, but they all were sort of like the holding company was a bigger company that's got the necessary finances to back them up, because in the end you want to make sure that they're available when you need them to support you.
And I mean, it's
Yeah.
becoming increasingly popular with the sort of decentralized teams that are taking place, where smaller organizations sometimes are actually even in the offices of enterprises as well, especially from a security perspective. But I'd like to shift the conversation a bit to incidents specifically and incident planning, response, and recovery, and get your insights. And maybe we can start with Grant on at which stage is the cybersecurity professional, the CISO, involved with incident planning, response, and recovery? Is it at the beginning, and are lawyers involved at the same time?
Yeah, so Nathan, the CISO is involved from the beginning, right? And I think when we talk about cyber incident response planning, there's different, I want to say there's different categories or levels to it. You obviously have technical incident response planning where you make sure the teams are able to respond, but then you also need to define a crisis response plan, right? So at some point, a cyber incident becomes a business crisis, and you need to be very clear on what the triggers are. And typically, the triggers would be that there's a regulatory impact, or there's a reputational impact, or there's some kind of liability impact, right? But there would be triggers at which point you would then invoke a cross-functional incident response or incident or crisis team, right? Legal would absolutely be part of the team. So would your PR team would be part of it. And the tabletop exercises become quite important. Somebody's going to have to speak to the media. Somebody will have to draft comms to your data subjects or your customers. And you want those things. I want to say you want some templates on hand. You want to know who the stakeholders are. So in my experience, a CISO was not the owner of the crisis response plan. That was typically enterprise risk and assurance, or the risk management function, or the BCP team would own the process, but we would be a key stakeholder in that process. You're on mute, Nathan.
I'm on mute. And I was going to say that sounds great in theory, though, but maybe Duncan or Gerald can add on here, does it practically always work out that way? Because I mean, I've seen scenarios where, or I've been involved in scenarios with organizations, enterprises, where the CISO and cybersecurity professionals' understanding of what an incident is and versus what a legal's understanding of an incident is completely different. And especially from a scope perspective.
Yeah, I think what's very important is to have, like Grant said, those exercises. One of the things that I've seen before is you've got your incident response plan, and everyone's who's responsible for what is well documented, and the auditors tick the box and they love it. But as soon as something happens, you phone somebody and they don't know, they've never had to deal with this before. They don't even know they're on this list. They've never done it before. So as we often use the term, like, incident response needs to be muscle memory for everybody. So we need to make sure we've practiced it, and everybody from the CEO down, legal counsel, risk, CISOs, operational teams, everybody need to know exactly what to do when something does happen. And so I think if you can have that regularly done, at least every quarter, probably more, where everybody just, and it doesn't have to be long and involved, but certainly just an email to the guy who is responsible for public communications. You know that this would happen, and this is what you need to do, and kind of go through that process and make sure everyone's aware. Because I think that is where it often falls down, where you think you've got everything, all the tick boxes done, but the person he left the company 4 months ago that is supposed to do some critical function, and nobody's kind of updated that.
Yeah.
No.
Uh,
Nathan,
yeah, go for it, Grant.
I just want to add one more thing, right? The other layer to incident response planning is to involve your partners, right? So if you operate in an ecosystem where you've got critical supplies, and I'll give an actual example. When I was working for Engine, right, we obviously had the Wimpy's and the famous brands and steers and all of those stakeholders. That's an integral part of the operation. Then we also formed a group with these partners so that we know if there's an incident that impacts all of us, we don't have to now scour around to say who's the contact person, who's the counterpart. So it's quite important that we do this incident response at multiple layers. Somebody's going to have to engage the regulator potentially. They need to know what the channel and the process is to do that when the time comes. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I also want to add to that, when incident tabletop exercises and things like that are being performed, it's often done in a vacuum where, only your senior people are invited to those tabletop exercises, and it never filters down or trickles down to the technical staff who's actually going to run these exercises for you in real life. Right. So you will have a couple of server technicians and things like that that is going to be dumbfounded when these things actually happen to them. And they are going to speak out of turn and all of that. So it's actually good to have these tabletop exercises or these, or let's say drills to include your technical staff and get them kind of used to it and build up that muscle memory, as Duncan mentioned.
Great, thanks, Gerald. I think Fundi's hand was raised as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I was actually trying to react to what Grant was saying. I agree. So from a governance perspective, I make sure that the standard is clear enough. And in reviewing the standard, everyone must be involved, legal, business, and your technical team. So we know what constitutes a severity 1 and a severity 2, and we know how each one is treated. And then we do those drills as often as possible. Like Duncan says, it must be a muscle memory, because when an incident actually happens, people are now all panicked. Suddenly they don't know where to find the documents. They have no idea where to go, really. So we should always know who should be speaking to the regulator, who should be speaking to the board if this is a severity 1 or 2, and if it requires such. In my case, I actually even put it in the KPIs that if this is your part, and we experience a severity 1 and 2, you will respond to the board in so many hours, you will respond to the regulator, or rather communicate to them in so many hours. Thanks.
Really great points. And I mean, so which brings me to the next question. Something I've been thinking about and haven't been able to figure out yet is how to incentivize across, whether it's at an exco level all the way down to your day-to-day staff members, to get that culture of cybersecurity embedded within the organization. Do you have any tips or guidance? I know there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but you guys may likely have practical insights on that.
It's actually something that we're sort of trying out right now. So we do these cyber simulations, right? And people click, and it's been frustrating because people continue to click with all the training that is done. And then we started saying, let's try and remove links so that we just change a culture. We don't have links. So if you see a link, it really must stop you and make you think. Then other businesses decided that they're going to have some sort of like consequence management. But now it creates a whole lot of fear, and it's got its own disadvantages. So one business decided they actually will incentivize people that don't click, people that show that like in their everyday work that show their consciousness to this, and part of that is reporting things that even if it's not the wrong thing they are reporting, but as long as they've got that consciousness that when we see something that looks fishy, we report it to SecMon. So they are starting to incentivize such behavior.
Yeah, just wanting to add to that is that, when cybersecurity is a team sport, right? So everybody needs to deliver on it, and it would actually be a great idea if everybody in all organizations add this to their KPIs, and test the workforce out there, not just testing them with regards to sending out know before stuff and things like that, but also if you actually don't meet these standards, it will show up on your KPIs and your increase might be impacted there. So
yeah, I mean, I think it has. Sorry, go on, go for it. I think you were saying.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Nathan, what I'll say is, right, it's very important for the culture and awareness and education program to be to be risk-based and tailored, right? So you need to segment your users based on the risk. So you take, for example, you've got IT support staff. Now, your IT support staff, they're going to receive a phone call to say, "Hi, I'm Nathan, I'm traveling, please reset my password." Now, on that basis, you need to educate them on what they are likely to encounter. Then you take procurement, right? And you say procurement, you are likely to get an email from a supplier saying, "We've got a new bank account, please update and pay here," right? It's extremely important that we move from the generic, don't click the link, don't use the Wi-Fi at the airport, to something that's hyper personalized based on the context, right? And then it's also very important to spring in something personal. You need to educate people at school holidays. Your kids going to spend more time online. Be aware of these dangers. When you make the program personal, you get people, and when you personalize it, you also get them because it's relevant. It's somebody will say, "Oh, I see these emails all the time. I can relate." So it needs to move away from the generic. And then in terms of consequence management, we need to be very careful with that. If the organization does go that route, there's a downside to it as well, right? On the upside, people are more cautious, they're scared. On the downside, they make a mistake, they try and conceal it. So it's just important to be aware of that. Over to you, Duncan.
Yeah, 100%, Brian. I find for us the most effective thing that I've found in this space is telling stories. It's making people watch a video about something that's not actually applicable to them is not great. So what we do is we try and make it as real as possible. So we bring security into your home life, into the lives of your children, and how you're protecting yourself and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you can bring that behavior to work, I'm happy. And also what we do, which I've found to be quite effective, is we've done some very serious penetration tests in our own environment. And then when we take those reports, we actually turn them into stories that I then tell to everybody. We tell to the people in marketing and the people in finance and the people in everywhere around how they got into the building and how they followed the vapors and the smokers through the back, and how they plugged something into the network, and how somebody leaving their laptop unlocked got them to plug in a USB device, and this is what we got from it. And you tell them not these hypothetical, this could be risk skies falling things. You tell them what actually happened in a fun sort of interactive story way, and I find that people are fascinated by it. Like most people really are. This kind of dark cyber world is fascinating and interesting. And if you can turn it into sort of real life stories that people can relate to, that makes a real difference. Because now people are suddenly thinking when they get up, "Oh wait, Duncan told me about that. I must lock my laptop before they get up," and that kind of stuff. And so we're seeing a massive difference in our culture. And I think telling stories and just making it real has made a huge difference. And then one other thing I just wanted to add, and Joel reminded me of it when he said about security is a team sport. Security is a team sport for everybody in the organization, but it's also a team sport for everybody who's not a bad guy. We're all on the same side here. And I think one of the concerns I have when the legal teams get involved in incident response is that they lawyer up and they hide things and they don't share what's going on in the and there are some very valid legal reasons for some of these things. But I really do, as a customer, I'm very appreciative of a company when they have an incident, that they're open, transparent, and honest about it. And it also helps us, who are all on the same team, if something happens at Grant's organization and he sends me a WhatsApp, "Hey, we just got compromised through this," I can immediately go and check that same stuff in my space. And we already have, as CISOs, we have groups that we kind of talk about this kind of thing on, but it's all very unofficial, and we've got to be very careful what we say. But I think if we can start to change this mentality of security as a competitive advantage and that kind of thing, and if we can start to share a bit more, people being secretive about the stuff is exactly what the bad guys want, because they can use the same tricks multiple places. If we're a little bit more transparent and open, I really do think they would make quite a difference to the world, not just our companies.
What you said is, I mean, you've hit the nail right on the head. I think the 2 points that I'd just like to tease on over there is, the first is that the training sessions that you do have, and I mean you as in cybersecurity professionals, tends to have this contagious effect where someone will go home and tell someone else, and they'll tell someone else in their community, and it has this knock-on effect, which is a net positive effect, I'd say. And then also on the openness and transparency, I agree. I mean, I wrote an article last week about legal professional privilege and how lawyers at large companies often think that privilege, which basically means that the information is kept confidential and away from anyone that the client doesn't want to share it with, only needs to apply to situations where the company needs legal or regulatory advice. It doesn't need to apply to the fact that an incident has happened. And there's a big confusion about that. But at the same time, I do think we need to move along pretty quickly because we have a limited amount of time left. So let's start with Fundi and say, if every lawyer learned one cyber concept tomorrow, what do you think it would be? Or should be, rather? And Fundi has left the WhatsApp group. You're back,
Put me right on
Fundi.
the spot there. Look, for me, I make sure that when I communicate a cyber risk, it's in business terms. When I communicate it that way, whether there's a lawyer or there's the business executive in the room, we're suddenly speaking the same language. I always make sure that when I interpret a particular risk that we are facing, number one, it can be quantified in rand value, and then you as a lawyer, you know exactly how much liability you must place against that company by virtue of what we've actually said. But it's like, I think my point is to try and demystify the language that we all speak a similar language. In our corners, we can go with the jargon, but when we are together, it has to be business language. Thanks.
Thanks, Fundi. So shared vocabulary. Over to Grant.
Nathan, for me, the one thing I'd say that they need to learn is reasonable security is a moving target, right? Whatever is reasonable and well configured and perfect today can be inadequate next week because the landscape has shifted. So I think the realization that it's not about absolute security, it's just about always being able to demonstrate that I've done what is reasonably possible, risk-based within the context and the budget of the organization.
Perfect, thank you. So reasonableness as a moving goalpost. Over to you, Gerald.
Yeah, so on my side, it would be, we are dealing with human beings here, right? Cybersecurity, we are looking at the logical stuff and the tech and everything behind it, but the people that still manages it and works on it and uses it on a daily basis are all human beings. So, nobody's perfect, and we shouldn't be when I walk into the room, sometimes people will say, watch out, Chips, Gerald's coming, cybersecurity guy is here, it's the LAPD. And it doesn't always work like that. It's almost like, we actually want you to talk. We actually want you to tell us where the weaknesses are. So don't sweep everything under the rug. We are dealing with human beings. We are also human beings. Come and talk to us.
Just a note to everyone, Gerald is a human being. He isn't a bot that is joining us on this conversation right now. This isn't a Sora simulation. But over to Duncan.
I think what everyone else has said is pretty much covers it. I think what I would appreciate, and I'm working with our legal team to try and also get better at this, is just for them to take the security side of contracts and MSAs and that kind of stuff as seriously as they do some of the other contractual things, because I mean, the incidents that we've had worldwide show how important it is. And so I think that message is starting to get through. I can definitely see it starting to shift, but it is the security stuff is extremely important when dealing with third parties and contracts and that kind of thing. And often it has been overlooked or kind of in a tiny little addendum at the bottom that no one actually pays any attention to.
Until something goes wrong, and then you've been called on. Okay, so in the last few minutes of the session, we're actually going to go through some attendee questions. We received quite a few questions that came through, which we grouped into categories. Jessica, are you with us? Are you live, Jessica?
Bad joke, bad joke. Okay, yes, I'll start reading the questions. So the first one is for anybody to answer. It reads as follows. Hi, everyone. I refer to a recent case where a buyer of a home, approximately 5 million, got scammed when she paid it over to the law firm, and where scammers then subsequently were able to change the banking details of the law firm. The court of the first instance found in the layman's favor, citing amongst other that the law firm did not have, quote unquote, adequate cybersecurity measures in place. Said judgment was overturned though. Options, perspectives on this concerning adequate cybersecurity measures of a law firm, please.
You poked a nerve. Can I start? So this one drives me nuts because we expect people in the public to have good cybersecurity stuff when they do this kind of thing very rarely. And yet we expect estate agents, car dealerships, conveyancers, these guys who do this every day, who are often the ones getting compromised. And it's kind of the person who got scammed kind of fault. They need. I do think that, especially like when you're buying houses or buying cars or estate agents and that kind of thing, they need to take this kind of stuff much more seriously. And I mean, let's be honest, the amount of money that we're dealing with here, sending an email with a PDF to pay 5 million for something, that is ridiculous. Like, how can we do that in 2025? There are much easier and much better ways to do it, but I don't know if it's an education thing or laziness, or it's just the way it's always been done, so it's fine. But we have to, I think the people who are dealing with that on a regular basis need to take more responsibility in that space. So I fully supported that the legal firm in that case was found sort of having to pay back the money, but I'm quite disappointed that it got turned over. But I really do support the little man in this fight.
To Duncan's point as well, I mean, so just about the adequate security measures, I'm going to reiterate what a few of the panelists have said, and that's really it's such a legal answer, but it depends on the data that's being handled at the firm. It depends on what systems are in place. It depends on a number of factors, and that would influence what adequate or reasonable cybersecurity measures would be in place. But I share Duncan's sentiment that the standard of it's more to do with the standard of care that falls on organizations versus falls on the ordinary person like you and me. That's very different. Not everyone is a cybersecurity professional and has an advanced understanding of it. And to one of the earlier points, we don't have a culture at a sort of public level of cybersecurity. Everyone does cybersecurity. Next question, Jessica.
Okay, this one is for Fundi. I wonder, Fundiswa, with such risk, what does it say about safeguards in the lifespan of information? What kind of time frame did you use to push the information from the service provider? I wonder between 24 hours, 7 days, or even an hour, a breach can occur. How do you assess what is a reasonable time for that data to sit with the service provider that has no security safeguards at all?
Yeah, remember what Duncan said, that we will still do business with you, but we will assess how much of it is acceptable. So depending, for example, on how many records, in fact, the two examples that I made, where we were pushing so much data to the US, it was in hundreds of thousands of records, I think, per month. So what we required, but they had the right security controls. The main issue there was that we vet our people in South Africa, but you might find that the same person that's vetted here is on the US sanctions list. So you are exposing them to a risk which they did not choose, right? So we would ask them that after they've done whatever they needed to do with the data, they completely wipe it off their systems. It is pushed through to us. If you come to the smaller company that we dealt with here in South Africa, so those are people that will make phone calls throughout the day. You will fax to them proof of income, proof of this, proof of that. So they don't deal with huge records. So if you say they must push through the records every single hour, there is an element that if someone broke into their system, they will find some records. But then we worked it out to be, it won't be more than 10 records at a time. And when you say how long are you going to do business with that kind of vendor, look, this was a project. At the end of the project, they got their money. Possibly they went and spent some of it in putting together some cybersecurity controls. At least I hope so, so that because they almost lost that deal actually. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Fundi. Jessica?
Okay, so we have got 3 minutes left, I think, because I saw there was a little timer that popped up. I'm going to a few more questions. I'm just going to ask one last question. The other questions we can maybe answer through a post or just create a question and answer sheet that we can distribute. This last one is aimed at Grant. It says, how easy is it to make those awareness campaigns personalized? Does know before you have that facility, or are there other mechanisms?
So I'm not going to speak for Know Before specifically. It's not the one that we use internal, but it's quite easy to personalize. So what you need to do is firstly identify the high risk user groups, right? Procurement, and I'll share a few with you. Procurement, service desk, obviously your C-suite, also the executive assistants of the C-suite. And then there's less obvious groups, for example, the family members of the executives. When you really sit down and map out who these potential targets are, you then find that the kids and the spouses of your C-level also needs to be educated about what they share on social media and how they conduct themselves, right? Fortunately now with all the Gen AI tools, it's quite easy to get some themes going. Most of the platforms I would imagine does support it. I'm just not familiar with Know Before in their content catalog, but relatively easy to customize based on the different user groups. One way to practically do it is when you look at the phishing emails that's being reported from your users, you also start getting an idea of what the themes are that's going to different departments. And then you can use it as a basis.
Perfect. I do see
Thank
Gerald, your hand is raised.
Yes, I've got a question for you, Nathan, seeing that you're the only lawyer on the panel that's got a mic. So what do you think our cybersecurity practitioners should know from a lawyer's perspective?
See, I'm the wrong person to ask that question because I'm sort of I've seen it from the IT side and I've seen it from a legal side. But if I were to think through a hat of a traditional lawyer, I'd say that a lawyer's job is based on paranoia and protecting the organization from risk. And often that results in only seeing the harm that could result. And so, but what I found useful when lawyers interact with CISOs is that and general IT professionals, is that they start seeing it as, well, we have this problem. It is a legal problem. How could we still achieve the business objective and manage the legal risk? That has helped quite a bit, because then it shifts from my job is to protect the organization to risk to we have a goal that we need to achieve. We need to make money as an organization, as a for-profit organization. How can we achieve that within legal bounds? Okay, great.
Nathan, I'll send you the bill, Gerald, for that question.
It's already in the mail. What are you talking about? Just click the phishing link over there.
How are you going to spend your $5 million?
I'll just appeal it. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the incredible panelists for sharing their insights. It really is. You've really enlightened quite a few people based on some of the comments I've seen and also based on the interactions. There will be, for those that feel that their questions haven't been answered, we are going to publish a list of FAQs on the events page so that you can have the responses to your questions. So please keep out a look for that. And then also feel free to connect with and follow the speakers online. They're doing some incredible work in their roles. And if you do one thing, if you take one thing away from the session, it's that it's possible to create a culture of cybersecurity wherever you are. Any last words, anyone?